Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have Sam Nieves, who is advocating for the abandonment of a certain type of therapy. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And joining us today is Danica in support of Sam, and Songs of Our Own, who's helping me co-host today. Thank you, Songs, for helping co-host. So, Sam, tell us about let's have you mention your story leading up to your advocacy.
Got it.
And how that relates.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to know how I started advocacy, it's all started when I failed grad school. I decided to become a therapist because I got a degree in psychology. But what I did not anticipate is that as much healing as I thought I had achieved when I went into grad school to become a therapist, I was really surprised to see how much of what happened during my conversion therapy still happens in modern day therapy practices. So I was triggered a lot. I was not able to complete, and I kind of needed a place to heal. And a friend suggested, why don't you just go on TikTok and share your story? And that's kind of been its own thing. I also found a group for conversion therapy survivors, and I attended weekly, and now I'm one of the facilitators of that group. So that's kind of how I arrived in this space.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about what started you in conversion therapy. How did that happen? Was it family? Was it friends? Was it just get ganged up on?
Sure. I think it's always hard for conversion therapy survivors to tell our stories because, as much as we have a lot of similarities, every single one is different, and it's so often hard to know where it starts. And I like to orient myself and any other survivor by reminding ourselves of the research on conversion therapy by using the term SOGICE. It's a mnemonic standing for sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts. And I like that because that really broadens their horizon. So you can go all the way to conversion therapy adjacent practices where maybe you just hear over the pulpit, you can give it to God, He can change you. And it's not directed at you specifically, but you know that it is personally impacting you, all the way to what I experienced in the therapy room with therapists. And I am writing a memoir, which is kind of changing how I'm telling my story because I'm suddenly recovering memories I didn't realize were there. And I'm having to almost push back the timeline because I'm remembering all the times when I did experience conversion therapy adjacent practices and completely forgot about it because it was so normal, right? So for the moment, I say that my conversion therapy started when I served an LDS mission, and I was in the missionary training center. For some unknown reason, I was really struggling. When you think about the fact that I was a young 19-year-old at the height of my testosterone, now being forced to shower naked with a bunch of other men and be around men all the time, is it any wonder that a closeted gay male would be struggling with his thoughts when he's seeing all of these very attractive men?
And so you had known at an early age that you were same-sex attracted, as the church likes to say.
Well, the thing is my bullying started at 7, and community, like my peers, told me I was gay, but I didn't know that
without even knowing what that meant, sort of.
Yeah, and they would call me pedophile. They would call me, plenty of things. And as a kid, I didn't really know what any of that meant. And then they'd explain it to me and be like, why would I fall in love with babies? That's weird. So like none of that really made sense. But when I did hit puberty, I had my first boyfriend. But even then, I thought, well, this is just a thing. I'd be with a girl if I could, but they're not willing. So that's why I'm being with a boy right now. So
girls have cooties at that age.
Oh, I never got rid of that stage, honestly.
we still have them.
I think that's also a good instruction on just the role of misogyny, because I've always been attracted to how women can make me feel as a man and how they can validate my position as a man. But it was never the women I was attracted to. It's what they could do for me, And so that never really because people weren't talking about that, I couldn't see what was going on inside. And so I was always being like, no, I'm straight. I'm total. Look at my behavior. I'm straight. Right. I didn't know that I was gay, honestly, until I decided to leave conversion therapy, because it was always people telling me that I was gay and not accepting it for myself until I
Mm.
realized, yeah, this ain't going away. And then it stopped becoming like a phase and was just like just be honest, you know?
So did you go? So you were on your mission at the MTC. Is that when it
At the
became you?
MTC is when I had my first meeting with a therapist.
Okay.
And that therapist, from what I can remember, he told me that it was an easy thing to get rid of. I just have to meet with him. But I was about to go into the field in a few days, so there wouldn't be time. And because I had left my boyfriend when I was 13 and it was so far behind me, both the therapist and I agreed that it was in the past and I was just being tempted because that's how Satan works on you, and to just ignore it. Just basically ignore it.
Did you say your therapist said it's an easy thing to get rid of?
That's what I remember. I remember him being very nonchalant about it, saying that like, oh yeah, missionaries come in here for that all the time. We do a little work with them, then they go out into the fields, then they get married, and it's no big deal. And that matches what I do strongly remember with my other therapist after that. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that that therapist was like, oh, this is fine. It's
Everybody
just a
could read
phase.
scriptures. Everybody could pray, and God will help you.
Yeah, and that actually is the common theme that I had with basically every therapist that I worked with. They would treat it as something easy, just stop acting gay, because they would assume that I was. But none of them knew how to handle someone who was reading the scriptures every day, praying all day long, attending church every single week, attending the temple every week. Like if there was anyone who was in it to win it, I was definitely in it. And so they had no behaviors to change. So they had to dig deeper and go into the theories that were like being pushed and old theories that had been abandoned because nothing was working, because it doesn't work.
And I remember a similar story from, I think, David Archuleta,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
probably from all the missionaries who are gay entering the mission field, thinking that if you serve God, you will not only pray the gay away, but you'll serve the gay away, I bet, as well.
correct. Mm-hmm.
And so you come off your mission, and I guess the mission president tells you that to quickly hurry up and go get married, and that'll be the last thing that you can do to help you.
Not so much. So I was sent home early from my mission. About a year and a half in, I hate using the word sexual assault, but by definition, that is what it was. A missionary tried to get me to break my covenants with him. I think that's a lot better way for me to say it. I refused, but because of the scripture that if you lust after a woman, it's just as bad as if you had sinned, I believed that even though I said no repeatedly, I had sinned, because deep down I really, really wanted to, because I was very attracted to this guy.
Right.
So I tried to confess to my mission president what had happened, because he clearly needed to be sent home. But I was relying on, what we believe I don't know how y'all understood it, but for me, the spirit of discernment basically meant he could read my mind. And so I thought that, if he could, I couldn't tell him, but I thought if he would ask me directly, then I could say, yes, that happened, type of thing. And he never did. And so he only focused on my thoughts, which was I was struggling deeply. And that was the first time like an actual leader of the church called me gay, rather than saying that I was struggling with same-sex attraction. He like called me a gay and then said, well, I think we'll have to talk with the presidency, because they had just raised the bar. And because of the raising of the bar, I didn't qualify anymore. And it was pretty clear that I was having a mental breakdown. I was not in a good place. So they sent me home early with honor. and basically said, which to me meant like, if this gay thing cost you your mission, clearly this is not okay. So I was forced to come out to my parents over the phone, tell them why I was coming home in the first place. My mom called me a pedophile and I couldn't be around my little brother. So it was this life altering thing of like, if you're being sent home early for something that is still there that we didn't even know was there to begin with, this absolutely must be fixed. And it kind of seemed obvious from everyone around me, like my mission president, my parents, my own personal belief, the church. So it was like, I'm always surprised when people come out as gay and Mormon, because to me, it's like, well, then why didn't you try conversion therapy? Because that seems like the next natural step to me, unless you don't believe. Because I believed, and that seems like the next thing you should be doing.
Can I ask a question, Sam? You said in your mission they raised the bar. Was that lowering the age of the missionaries? Was
No,
that
that's
or what?
when I think it was Hinckley who was prophet at the time, and he said if you have any past transgressions of a sexual nature, then um, you haven't worked hard enough to be a missionary. You haven't kept yourself clean. And so for me, even though it was 13 when I did this, and then it was 13 when I abandoned my boyfriend, all of those years of being chased didn't matter. And so I no longer qualified.
Okay, so raising the bar basically just meant like another way to make people feel guilty.
Yeah.
For that happened before the mission. So in that sense, did you see that more missionaries felt unqualified or shamed or were sent home or decided to stop being missionaries?
I don't know. I blacked out a lot of my mission. And so what I can remember from it is now when I'm going back to my journals and reading what I can handle type of thing. And I have met missionaries from my mission uh, kind of lately. And they just tell me that apparently I was really mistreated on my mission for being gay. I do remember them calling me Elder Gay Anderson. Um, but the whole time I was on my mission, I wasn't focused on like other missionaries' emotions or what they cared about or what they wanted to do, because I was there to serve everyone else. And so when someone would like murmur about tracting, I would judge them. When someone wouldn't, when someone would like not study the 2 hours in the morning and then do this and then do that. If someone wasn't in any way completely 100% dedicated, my first reaction wouldn't be to have compassion. It would be to judge them, because the only way I could handle my gay attractions and be on task was to sing hymns, read scriptures, work harder, lose myself, and pretend that I don't exist. And so when any of the elders would talk about things from home or about their personal lives, it felt like it was a chink in my armor, like I was having to face reality, and I absolutely could not handle that. So I was very OCD and high anxiety about, being very, very letter of the law, follow every rule. Hope that makes sense. So I don't know.
Did the church offer you more counseling at the end of your mission or anything like that?
I don't remember. I know that they did suggest going to LDS Family Services, and that was the next set of therapists that I saw.
Okay. And then what happened?
They wanted to see my mom, my dad, my stepdad, and me. They called me being gay a family problem. So they told us that I was gay because my mom was an overbearing woman and my father was too passive, which was interesting because you do not tell a Puerto Rican Latina woman from the Bronx that she's doing something wrong, because that's a recipe for you um, to not be here anymore. So I thought that was quite bold of them. But unfortunately, that meant we did meet the mold. Like, because my dad is this very quiet, my stepdad's a very quiet man from Idaho, like a farm boy type of thing. Doesn't really say much, tells you he loves you by doing things for you. And my mom is very outspoken. She always tried to harp on my dad to be a better priesthood leader, to have family evening with us, to do all these things. And so that session with those therapists was basically my mom yelling at me, saying I wasn't doing enough, and I was always disobedient, and yelling at my dad for not being a better priesthood holder. So as much as it was not great that they were labeling my father as like overbearing mom and a passive father, like we literally fit the mold. So
That's right. Mommy and daddy issues at the same time.
yeah, I didn't like it, obviously, because it was just nothing but let's go to therapy so your mom can yell at you. I already got that enough at home. I didn't need to go to a therapist to make that happen. And it wasn't stopping me from being gay. Like nothing was changing except she was just yelling at me. So I begged my mom, can I please, please, please have my own therapist? Because the only relationship that I had with therapy was my relationship that I had with my priesthood holders. You know, you'd go into the bishop's office, you confess, maybe you lose the sacrament for a little bit, told to just pray harder, and then you're accepted, you're forgiven, everything's great. And so I thought if I could, maybe the reason I was still gay is because I hadn't confessed to a priesthood leader everything that I had done with my boyfriend. I had been too vague. And so
You hadn't
really what
really-
I needed, I thought I needed to confess more with a therapist.
So did you get your own therapist then?
Yeah, I got my next therapist. I actually remember his name because of my journals. His name was Ray. He diagnosed me with gender dysphoria, said that I was a transgender woman, and that the other hard part is like I have a lot of memories, but I don't know which therapist it went to.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably is the one who told me that I needed to dress more straight, act more straight, lower my voice, change how I walked, change my friend group, stop gardening, stop baking, stop ballroom dancing. Just basically it was a picking apart of every part of my life that was gender non-conforming.
Join the ward
And
softball team.
yeah, he wanted me to play football, which was so annoying to me because on my mission they had played skins versus shirts. That was not a safe environment for me. Like, how do you force someone to be around a bunch of naked guys and expect that to make him straight? That does not. He said you need to learn how to have close relationships with other men in the correct way, in the way that other men have with other men. And it was just really confusing, and I couldn't really do what he was asking me to do because it was high amounts of anxiety. Like, football is where I got bullied. That's not a place of healing. You know, we're not going to chum around with each other and talk about our feelings. We're going to hit each other. And that doesn't make me a man, but he thought it would.
So are you learning by now, we'll say, that there are different sort of camps of beliefs on how to cure gayness or whatever? And is that sort of a conversion therapy light, what he was offering? And then there's something else?
The world of conversion therapy, if you take a step back, it's just always evolving. And when something doesn't work, you try something from the past that has been abandoned because that's all you have, or you create a new theory. So in the past, you know, hundreds of years ago, they would do trephination, where they'd like take an ice pick and drill a hole in your brain to try to release the pressure and get the demons out. Obviously, they would do things that they're doing today, like trying to cast the demon out of you, things like that. Electroshock therapy was a thing. Aversion therapy is any type of therapy where you use behavioralistic. You try to condition the gay away. So, like electroshock therapy, vomit therapy, any type of violence, like the thing where I had the rubber band and you have to snap it really hard. And if it doesn't work, then you snap it harder. And then you go away from aversion therapy, which still happens, but is outlawed in a lot of places, but still happens. You go from that to what I had, which is more of a family therapy type of concept. And so what they called mine was reparative therapy. And so Dobson and a bunch of other people would come up with these theories of, you know, what is it about their gender norm that they're not fulfilling? And we have to repair that. we have to repair their family relationships because that's what made them gay. And then you come up with theories of they're gay because they were raped as a kid by probably a male in their family. And so a lot of people received a reparative type of therapy where the repair needs to be the person who must abused you is your father. And so you have to accuse him of sexually abusing you. And then when he confesses, then that will be healed. And then eventually you won't be gay anymore. And so it goes from like these extreme forms of behavioral therapy, aversion therapy, reparative therapy. And because reparative therapy has been understood now that that doesn't work either, now they basically have to form themselves into context therapy, which is what they do now, or Christian counseling, which is what they do now. And so it's just kind of like a smorgasbord of anti-queer rhetoric. And if something isn't working for you, then you just go explore what else is out there, even if it's been outlawed, because no one will know, right? Or I'm not acting as a therapist right now. This is just more of a counseling thing. And you're okay if we do this, right? Okay, I got consent. Cool. I think I'm safe. And because they want you to change them, they're not going to report you. And if they can report you, how do they prove it? Like we can't really take our therapists to court because it's really hard to prove they did what they actually said what they did. The only cases that I've seen that we've won is when it's clear in documentation that they're claiming to change us. And so that's false advertising. So because you can't pray away the gay, it just doesn't happen. And so we can win those lawsuits under false advertising. And so the only type of times when I've seen that work is when you go to a camp like Journey into Manhood, and they'll try to do these weird therapy tactics like drama therapy, where you act out your sexual violence, where you act out the times when you lost your virginity, things like that, hoping that will cure you. And because you have a document saying you went to this camp, or your parents sent you to a camp, now you can sue them as abuse because it's actually like documented what they would do to you, and that's an unethical thing. So that's why I go back to Sojice, because it just runs the gamut.
Act out like on a stage in front of other people, like describe it. You don't have to go into detail, but that just
no Danica, I'm sorry. If you there's actually a YouTube channel about Journey into Manhood where you do see what happens. And I unfortunately have a friend who is extremely damaged and is still very, very damaged by this, where when he went into Journey into Manhood, he basically saw someone, because you have to act it out. Like you literally have to say, I'm me, you're my father. And then you act out what it was like for him to rape you. So everyone sees it. And I don't know how far in detail they go, obviously. Well, no, I can't say obviously, because they do weird shit. And sometimes they will say
acting
things.
that out, imagining what it would be like also, because you said that they didn't do it. It may have happened, but I mean, when you said they wanted you to say that the fathers did that, even if it didn't happen, right?
Some of them, well, the problem is that when you look at the research about the queer community, we often are the victims of sexual abuse because we are, we're usually
passive
people. Yeah, we're people who are trying to hide it. And so because we're already trying to hide, we're a vulnerable community, and predators see that.
I saw those stats. I saw the stats of even, especially when it happens more, and that actually it correlated for myself also, and the age group, and also the neurodivergence that I have. So
I'm getting the vibe that everything is based on a faulty premise. Like if coconut trees had been killing people because the coconuts would fall, that coconut trees would just need to go through reparative therapy in order to not kill people anymore. But it's just a natural thing. Gravity happens and you just have to deal with it in other ways. And so I guess there's more science on that nowadays.
Yeah, and the problem is to use your analogy, when the coconuts still keep harming people, obviously what you're trying isn't working. So let's see what other people have done. And then when you try what those other people have done. And so there's all these camps of theories for aversion therapy, reparative therapy, family therapy. Literally, I'm always surprised when I talk with conversion therapy survivors, because I meet with us every single week and we share stories. I am always surprised these theories that I thought, no way you could bastardize this. This is such a healing thing that you can do with the family. Because I know therapy practice. I was a therapist for a while. I just didn't finish. And so there are these beautiful theories that I know, all of these different names of people who created these wonderful things that you can do. And all it takes is just a little tweet. That's why you're gay. And now that beautiful healing thing that can help someone now becomes a way to hurt someone. And so as an example, there's this concept called a double bind, where as a therapist, you try to help a client see that they're putting themselves or someone they love in a no-win situation, right? So like you're telling your kid to look at you in the eyes when you yell at them because they have to show you respect. But then when they stare in your eyes, you're challenging their authority, so you can't look at them. So it's like, so what am I supposed to do? Look at you, not look at you? Like, it's a no-win situation. And so what a therapist has done is he's taken that double bind and said, well, there's got to be something in your life history that double bound you into becoming a homosexual. So we need to find that, unwind it, and then you won't be anymore. So rather than having this thing that can be really healing of like, hey, let's regain your autonomy. Let's find the times in your lives when you were put in no-win situations and help you heal through that. Instead, they're trying to get you healing for the purpose of not being gay. And so it complicates it because now you might actually get some healing around some part of your life. But then when you get that healing and you're still gay,
Right.
Now what? And so you have shame and then think, maybe I really wasn't healed. Maybe that didn't really happen, and then it just makes you crazy, and it just sends you down all of these different avenues.
So I would assume that the research would show that, people are just being people, right? Mm-hmm. And that most mental health organizations denounce or renounce any of these reparative therapies, and yet they still go on. Are there professional groups that have broken off from mainstream mental health associations that still claim that these are good therapies to do?
Technically, yes. The problem is that I don't know of any reputable organization that still thinks that it's okay. Like every organization that I know of, and when I was trained, at least on the books, it was a cause to lose your license if you practice conversion therapy. Even if the state is okay with it and has no protections, your actual licensing organization does not allow it. The only time that I know people can practice conversion therapy is when they try to use a loophole of, I'm not doing conversion therapy.
I'm doing Christian therapy.
I'm doing culturally competent therapy. Because when you use that language, you have to acknowledge that you don't have to be the same religion as your client. But if that religion is important to that client, if that belief system is important to that client, you have to make space for it, even if you personally disagree with it ethically. And so that's the loophole, is I'm not doing conversion therapy. I never said that I could change them. I'm helping them figure out how to deal with it.
Within their belief system.
Correct.
I see.
That's the loophole. And you'll see a lot of Catholic organizations and Catholic colleges have conferences about how to do this and about the theories that help so many people and how the research is wrong. Look at our research instead. And you can still poke holes in their research, but they will claim that it works.
So how many years after your mission did you go through some sort of reparative therapies?
Oh, God. After the mission, 2 years.
Okay. So since that time, you just realized that you are the way you are. And then did you have therapy around that? Like how to be a more authentic you?
Well, Song's had a question, but let me think about that.
Oh, my question, I guess, was related to it goes back to what Jean was asking about when you left your mission and you were doing these therapies, and you mentioned Christianity, Jean, in that one. And what I was wondering, I guess, is just like how much of the early therapists that you had were based like in a religious nature? And then also, can, you know, I guess in what you've learned over the years, if somebody were to need, some type of therapy in dealing with, how to handle, I guess, just the supports needed to come out, are there therapies they can do now that are not religious in nature if they don't come from a religious background?
Well, for me, I refused to see anyone who wasn't religiously based because I thought that therapy in general is too liberal and that they would have a conspiracy to keep me gay. I absolutely had to meet with other Mormon therapists or I wouldn't see them.
Due to your
I didn't
religious
quite,
conditioning.
yeah. And the thing is, even when we told each other, like, because I did go to a group called Evergreen, which is now disbanded. It's now turned into organizations like North Star. There's others, they're just everywhere. But organizations where they try to help you deal with your same-sex attraction. And that's why I actually hate when anyone uses the term SSA, because the only time you use same-sex attraction is in conversion therapy groups. So to even use it is to affirm their idea. And so even when we would talk about like, the research says that, you can't change it, we would just remind each other that God can do anything. Like you can't put limits on God. And so really we just need to have better faith. We will be the ones to make it happen. And then they would have people on stage being like, oh my God, look at me and my wife and my kids. Does it matter that she's a lesbian and that I'm a gay man and but like we do what we have to make kids? Who forget all of that. Well, look, we're cured, and they would try to convince people that we could be cured too, even though like 10, 20 years later, they come out and denounce what they did and reaffirm that no one ever changed. We just tried to push it deeper down. I think there was another part of your question I didn't really answer, but I think I also kind of didn't understand it. Sorry, did I answer that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just, I don't know, because I feel like conversion therapy, like the reason it still exists in whatever forms is because people are trying to fit into religious molds. And so that's, I think, where I was going with that, like in the early days of your therapy. But then I think now, for maybe young people coming out, I think probably therapy and dealing with the world around them and, whether that's religious or not, is there, are you finding that there are therapists that they can find that are not related to the sort of, conversion therapy aspect, but just about self-acceptance or, just dealing with
Yeah.
the troubled world?
Yeah. So I could speak to that. There are conversion therapy therapists who do that in non-religious contexts. It's usually because of social or cultural pressure. I do know, I think I've only heard of one or two. It is more the minority, but it does happen. It's the same thing of like, how does conversion therapy happen to women? Absolutely. But because of cultural aspects where of misogyny, basically, men are typically more the ones forced into conversion therapy than people who identify as women. And it's religiously based, usually more than non religious. So there's definitely trends, but yes, it does happen in non religious settings. I was going to say there was someone who talked to me from England who said that she was a teenager and she wanted conversion therapy and she was sad because it had just been outlawed in England. But now that I'm remembering more of it, it was because of her personal religious belief. So I guess, at least in my exposure, I don't think I've seen any environments where it is culturally based and they're just trying to deal with, social pressures. But I could imagine that that could happen. Which is why I always go back to Sojice, because you could think that it wasn't conversion therapy. I was just dealing with this. I was just dealing with that. But if you ask yourself, okay, but in any way, shape, or form, was that therapist trying to make an effort to change your orientation, diminish your orientation, reduce it, ignore it? Like if they were trying in any way, shape, or form to help you fit into a mold of heteronormativity, then by definition, that is Sojice, and definition, that is conversion therapy.
So it's almost like saying, look, you can make more money if you didn't act gay, or you can have more friends if you behaved more like other normal people or something like that. That would be a similar type of thing.
Yeah, by definition, you could call that sogize.
Danica?
This is about the whole conversation, but for songs, you and I experienced conversion therapy adjacent as women in misogyny, because when I, as a bisexual person myself, who has gone back into the closet, I have gone to some of the conversion therapy group settings, and I was blown away by how triggered I was that the people who experienced more when they shared their stories of how conversion therapy and being yourself in society was not acceptable. Smile more for women. This
Put
is
on a
what
little lipstick.
this is what you have to be a woman. This is what you have to wear to be a woman. You will not be liked as a woman. The men won't like you as women. I mean, that more so than my being bisexual was so much more harmful and triggering, because I had to be stuffed into that box of what it is to be a woman. And I legit put that mask on and did it. And it harmed me. Yeah. So.
And Danica, how have you felt being involved in the groups? How has that helped you?
Well, originally I felt imposter syndrome. And then when I expressed how similar it was in so many ways, Sammy said, it's almost like you belong there. And it's true. And I feel like, it taught me so much. I also feel like we should, I don't know, break up some of this stuff a little into different little groups of what types of conversion therapy adjacent we experienced. It's just like, you guys, what they did to society to try and keep them straight is also what they did to women to keep them into what their definition of a woman was. And I hit a point in my life where I just resent everything about being a woman, and I still feel like a woman, but I guess I don't in their definitions. I am not their definition of a woman. I'm me. And why did that have to be labeled and turned into what should have been me? I don't even know if I'm making sense there, but.
So it's almost like you experienced trad wife therapy all your life, and that wasn't resonating. And then finally, when you get in the groups, you can understand.
I can garden, I can bottle, I can help them butcher the elk that my husband brought home with his bow and arrow. Dehydrate. I mean, host classes. I educated myself on all the food safety things. It's a whole science, and I did it all, and I proudly posted it all over the internet. And yeah.
Thanks.
That's why I think it's so important to go back to the term sogize. It includes gender identity for major reasons. Yes, it does impact transgender people, trying to force them to not be trans. But just like Danica said, it's if you're trying to force your gender identity or sexual orientation into something that it's not, because of societal expectations, that is harmful and damaging, and the research backs that up.
So even like anti-pornography or anti-masturbation discussions in church is actually a similar form of the adjacent area.
Yep, that's conversion therapy adjacent practices. And the reason I like to call it that is because it calls out that it is harmful, and that just because some people can say that it helped them, that doesn't mean that it's harmless. And some people get through conversion therapy and immediately we've had people join our group of survivors. I think the soonest I found was, I think someone said they had just gotten out a month ago. And so someone could do that and it doesn't harm them nearly as much because they can heal past it. But for me, God, conversion therapy was back in 2000. It was almost 20 years ago. And only 5 years ago did I find this group. Like 15 years of not being able to afford therapy. I've just barely been able to have a living wage. So affording therapy was out of the question because the people paying for my therapy were my parents because they wanted it to work. But then when I came out, they disowned me. And so I had no financial support. I had to get my own car insurance because I was still under 25 and then it was high, right? So like I was financially completely on my own and there were times I had to beg for food. And so like I could not even afford therapy because that was like the least thing that I could handle.
Right.
Meanwhile, I would still wake up in nightmares with sweats and all these things, right? So it was not an easy time.
There could have been community groups that would have had low or free therapy, but if you don't know those things exist, then they don't exist to you.
And the queer community, let's be honest, it's amazing, and we have a lot of problems. And one of those problems is that in the queer community, when someone tells you, "Hey, I tried to pray the gay away," you're kind of a pariah because that's the antithesis of what we're about. We're about accepting. We're about loving you. You know, no matter what there is about you, you need to accept it. And so when you find someone who's frankly deeply misogynistic, homophobic, you know, all of these really internalized problems coming out of conversion therapy, getting into the queer community and wanting acceptance, there's no understanding of like, why would you try to pray it away? Yeah, I can understand being in the closet for your safety, but why would you hate yourself so much? And there's few people who can understand we had no choice to hate ourselves. We absolutely had to. And you had to convince yourself that it was good and you had to want it because then if you didn't want it, you weren't trying hard enough and it wouldn't work.
That's
That's
right.
what we would tell ourselves.
And if you stayed gay, you wouldn't be in heaven with your family.
Exactly. So the queer community has a lot to learn too, because A, they think it doesn't happen anymore. And B, if it does, it's hard to understand and sympathize with them because we're living in our queer joy so much, it's hard to remember what it was like if we ever did hold self-hatred.
So you weren't even in a position for 15 years to be an advocate for anything because you were unaware of the resources. And how did you find the group?
I did advocate,
Uh-huh.
but it wasn't from a place of strength.
Right.
It was from, you know,
Your own
like
feelings.
yeah, absolutely not. I've been a mess for quite some time, I would say. I mean, I had dissociative identity disorder, CPTSD, just like I was not in a good place. The only way I found this group was by accident, because when I left grad school or was kicked out, whichever narrative you want to go with, um, I just announced it on Facebook and I was depressed for quite a while. And someone who was in conversion therapy with me and survived and was a friend on Facebook said, "Hey, there's this group that I've been with. It was just started. Why don't you come join and see if you like it?" And it was started during the pandemic. And so I've been in this group for a while and I've made associations with other people. I'm learning about the history of other groups. And I'll be honest, this, as far as I can tell, this is the first group for conversion therapy survivors by survivors. And it only started 5 years ago.
Wow. And so we'll
So,
provide a link to that in our show description for anybody that's interested in, they know somebody that could use that type of a group setting.
mhm.
And so since then, you've become more educated on things. And how would you describe your advocacy? What types of things are you able to do?
I would say it's evolving. Um, I try to find ways to keep my personal opinions out of my advocacy because my personal opinions are very anti-religious, very anti-conservative, like very strong feelings, right? But when I make space for my advocacy, I remind myself the goal of the group. The goal of the group is to accept everybody and everyone who's a survivor of conversion therapy. And that means there's going to be people who still hold their faith, and that's okay. And it's deeply important to
Right.
them, and they deserve support. And so when I'm in group, I'm trying to remind myself that there are people here that I deeply love. We have a Muslim in our group, we have a Christian in our group, we have a Jewish person in our group. Like, religion is still there, and it's still deeply important to them. And to demonize something that gives them strength is wrong. And I learned that as a therapist, and I think just as a human being, that's important to remember. And so I try to, in my advocacy, educate about the harm and tell people that there is a place for you to heal. And then I do sometimes try to clap back at people who are hateful. I find that it's hard to tell people who are anti-queer that they're performing conversion therapy because they don't think that that's a thing. They only think of conversion therapy as being forced in a room and electroshock. That's the only thing they think of. And because they didn't shock you and
Right.
torture you physically, they don't think that they're damaging anyone or torturing anyone psychologically.
So another way of saying that is like microaggressions or something like that.
Yeah, and Sojice definitely includes microaggressions, and those
And
microaggressions build up.
if you started all your conversations with people, you asshole religious bigot, it'd be hard for them to listen to the rest of what you're saying.
That's
Is that
correct.
right?
That's correct.
Is
I
that why
feel it.
people don't listen to me anymore?
Could be.
I knew it.
So yes, you have to craft a message, right?
I'm also trying to remind myself that let's be brutally honest. It is going to be religious people who will end conversion therapy by making spaces for the queer community. People who are accepting the queer theology and recognizing that there are many scholars, at least for the Christians specifically, who say that it is not as anti-queer as you think it is. There are different interpretations of this, and there's reasons, academic reasons, to say that this is not homophobic. Jesus never said anything about being gay. There's reasons for this. Let's make some room for queer people. Let's change our culture. Those are the people who are going to end conversion therapy, not me, because they are going to stop the demand. And when the demand stops, then therapists won't have to create these weird theories based on their bias about why someone should try to pray the gay away.
There are conservative religionists that oppose the big tent, right? They want to have everybody look like themselves, and they're afraid of expanding their horizons. And when people don't act or look like them, they are fearful in a way that somehow that will take away their own personal future heaven or something like that. And I think that, to me, Jesus's message, and probably other religionists from the past, was, love and acceptance. Love your neighbor. How? And like, who's your neighbor? Well, everybody, even the, Samaritan or whatever, understands that principle, or whatever the theory is on that parable. That is, like you say, it will be the big tent religious people that are the allies, the advocates, that is the hope for the future.
Yeah. So I have to keep my personal atheist beliefs out of it. I need, it's the big tent that's going to stop it. And so for me, I have to use the big tent too. And I'll be honest, as much as I don't like it, sometimes I really deeply connect with the religious queer people in group, because whether I like it or not, I was so devout, it had a huge impact on who I am. And to push that away is to push parts of myself away. And I may not like it, but I do need to embrace my Mormon roots. And as I've done that more, I've actually found healing in ways that I've been really surprised to find.
That's great. Songs, do you have any? I think we're pretty much done with the show, but I was wondering if you had any parting words or thoughts that you could share with everybody. Let us have it.
Yeah, I thought about this a couple times earlier when you guys were talking. So when Sam, you said something early on about your relationship with women and how it felt like, I don't know, when I heard what you said, I felt like something I have thought for a long time growing up in the religion that we grew up in, about how women feel like a transaction, like it's, what they can make you feel and how you, and I think that is not, I think that's more universal. I think that's how we feel as, like, growing up in a religious background like that. I think you feel like everything was a transaction. I think for me, that revelation, and that might fit into some of the Sojice part of it, but they were those gender expectations. Well, you have to do this and you have to do that. Like, you gotta, as a female, your job is to make sure that, dinner is prepared and on the table at 5 p.m. when the man walks through the door, kind of thing. And I remember, that being sort of an abusive situation, for in my background, and but it is that whole idea of the transactional relationship, and even, you see that in, I don't know, I feel like that runs the gamut of, whatever. I don't know. It's so pervasive in that society, like whether you're gay or straight or whatever, that's, that's the expectation. And it's probably common in a lot of religions, but I grew up in mainly one, so I can relate to that part of it. But when you said that, it really just connected, and then it connected what Danica was saying too, with that whole thing of, you're expected to be certain ways, and
It's the
if you are not fitting,
gender identity part.
yeah,
That was my
the gender identity.
who I had to be acceptable, respectable, and loved in society. The way I could have a roof over my head. The only way I was allowed to have a roof over my head, because we weren't allowed to have jobs and dreams and abilities to provide for ourselves. We had to depend on that, and that was the man's role.
You were a helpmate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Helpmate.
Yeah, it's like you weren't even a full person. You were a helpmate, exactly. And I had never personally felt like that, but I always felt like just I was always butting against all those things because I was never those things. I'm going to sit at home and sew. Well, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but that has never been like, I don't know. I just always had ambitions outside of the expected mold, so I felt like I was always butting against that. So I can relate to that whole, the gender that you're raised in, you have to do these things. I was like, yeah, that's not who I am. And I think, we think that we have to be these things. And I don't know. I just wish there had been more room for individuality, but then maybe we would have all stayed there if there had been, maybe we wouldn't have realized that that wasn't a functional way to survive. So I can understand and relate to that. And also just knowing people who I know who have struggled through all of this, it's just, so important to get out there, like the message of, how we can be more authentically ourselves and how we can let people be more authentically themselves, and how not to promote the narrative of conversion therapy, like mentality. So thank you, Sam, for bringing that on. And Danica, I appreciate you guys sharing with us today.
Yeah. And I think consent is part of that, right? When our society learns more about consent, then we can, be more accepting of other people. And I want to thank Danica as well. And Danica, I hope that you have some closing words for us. Danica was the one that suggested I do a show with Sam, and thanks, Danica, so much. And I wondered if you had any parting words as a supporter of Sam, like what he has meant to you, and what you hope for the future.
Sammy is just, I'm so inspired by his ability to help connect all of us together and just help us to open our eyes and take our power back. Like, it's been so freeing when I've been able to put I've been able to put my foot down with loved ones that I never thought that I could do before. And
Set boundaries.
Set boundaries. I thought it was going to be the scariest thing in the world. As I about around Mother's Day time, we had my in-laws over, and it was a big deal. All the whole Budweiser, I don't know, I think it was the Budweiser stuff was going on and everything during that time. And my family was bringing up Target because that was getting brought up, the different clothes that the gender, and I was like, actually, they're trying to take gender out of the whole equation. It's the opposite of sexualizing people. And I even had enough. I was like, I'm going to take my own kid there and see if she would like to go through any of those clothes, because she didn't like being put in a box either. And my mother-in-law just couldn't understand. No, they're putting people into a box. And I'm like, no, they put me in a box by telling me I needed to wear a dress as a child, then telling me I needed to sit in a manner that kept the boys away because they were going to be tempted by my body. Like,
you were pornography.
I was pornography to them. You guys sexualized me. And then I legit walked out of my own house and took a walk. I expected I was going to just cry or have an anxiety attack. I took this breath in and I felt powerful. I'm like, I just stood up to my own in-laws, and and they've always been wonderful to us, but they just have their views, and you just let them talk, and you just let it be, because you can't be contentious. And it felt so powerful to just say, stop sexualizing everybody. You guys think you're protecting people. You guys think you're the moral authority here, and you guys are being harmful. And it's actually pretty sick.
That's
Truly.
right. The sexualization is like telling people to not think of purple elephants with pink polka dots, and that's all you can think of after that.
You don't need to look at my children and expect them to be accepted or respectable, because you know what their genitalia would be like under the clothes by the clothes you force them to be put in. It's
if I can maybe wrap a little bow, because Songs and Danica just said something beautiful. I keep hearing the same story. There's a woman in our group who shows up often, who kind of blew my mind about kind of this idea of forcing women to be in specific gender roles, and that being a part of conversion therapy. She identifies as a lesbian and was in a straight relationship for over a decade, and she would say that was the major part of her conversion therapy, just being forced to be married to a man. And it was fascinating because one time when we were talking about how gross it was, when our therapist would be like, just try a woman, you'll like it, right? Like, just try her, like she's food that you can spit out when you're done with her, type of thing. She just had this flash of like, oh my God, I should have realized what was going on, because I loved my husband like I loved my cat. There was no like human to human, I love you. There was a transactional, you do this for me, I do this for you. And I think that's the power of conversion therapy survivors, is that we experience the extreme of heteronormativity and misogyny. And so when we break out, the lesson we learn is to love people authentically and treat people like humans rather than objects that can do things for you. And that is the ultimate lesson that I think we have to share for people. And I think ultimately that's why when Danica came and experienced that imposter syndrome, we were able to show like, no, you actually quite belong here. Like, you're a survivor. Like, regardless of where you are on that scale, you experience conversion therapy as a bisexual because you were forced into one little box, not just your sexual orientation, but also your gender identity. And I think that is an important part that absolutely can't be missed.
That's right. Well, thanks, Sam. Thanks, Danica. Thanks, Songs. I hope everyone can realize, the value of the big tent, and share this video with anyone that you know that could use it, either as potential joining the group that Sam talked about, or for people who are religious and maybe would consider the big tent as an option as a future, and that can be an advocate and still be religious. And yes, I value everyone's religious beliefs. I don't necessarily have to interpret the same way every scripture or every negotiation, I think, as Dan McClellan would say, that people, have to negotiate what the words are saying and what they mean. And we can negotiate together to a more healthy state of mind and state of the world. I hope this helps create a big tent, and that, Jesus said, love your neighbor. And we do want people to love their neighbors, right? He didn't say hate your neighbor, as far as I can tell. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the year. Bye-bye.